Hello and good evening. Welcome to Tits and Bits. Well, I guess some of you do know how to access an adult site. Matt Pedersen of videobox.com will now tell us how to set up and maintain one. Have fun.
Thanks. So I originally thought that the glow sticks out front would kind of distract people, and I'd only have maybe 20 or 30 geeks that would be all male. But we've got a pretty diverse audience here for a CCC presentation. Pretty excited about that. One of the things that really frustrates me about conferences in particular, when you have a foreigner show up like myself, is, well, does this guy have any clue? Is there any sort of background or context? Is he a complete idiot or a wanker or a loser or that sort of thing? And so I think it's appropriate to give just a little quick background of history of myself, history of the company, and where we're at, and kind of go from there. Like a typical teenager in the US, I worked at a mom and pop ISP when I was young, essentially doing things like, BBSs and Mac TCP and Dial D and all that good stuff, and ignoring things like drugs and women and all that good stuff. Wi-Fi at an event called Burning Man. Mad props to CCC for the network that they put on here. I know the pain that they go through. It's slightly more challenging when you're in an environment that doesn't have any electricity and is on a dry lake bed desert, and there's 40,000 people. So really great effort on the network here. I do live and work in what's called SoMa, or the South of Market District in San Francisco, and it's very famous for the Web 2.0 space, and I'll be doing some analogies to that in tonight's presentation. Worked for a blog company. If you're geeky enough to recognize the AS, you'd be familiar with that company. For some clarification, I'm not kind of a typical sysadmin or a network engineer, or not really a suit, kind of somewhere in between. I really enjoy the technology, but I much more enjoy the social aspect, like the great event we're at tonight. Finally, as kind of a joke, kind of hitting the quarter-life crisis. It's pretty obvious what my age is then. Seeking suggestions for some creative outlets besides getting a motorcycle or a tattoo. What other things do Unix guys do? If you have any suggestions. Nice. So let's talk a little bit about the overview of the presentation. Is it worth actually staying and sitting in, or should we go back to Camp Anaconda and start drinking? Tonight we're going to be talking really briefly about a quick industry backgrounder. I think when we think of porn, we think of just membership sites, and maybe there's some billing involved and there's some studios, and that's really about it. But it's a lot more complicated than that. We'll also talk about my day job, how we think we're different, and what sort of Kool-Aid we're drinking in that regards. Batch encoding. How do we encode all this content, get it online, and make it available to customers? Performance monitoring, in particular, how do we monitor the download speed for customers and make sure to have a good, pleasant experience? And briefly on security, and then some of the kind of humorous feedback and reporting that we get from our customers and potential customers. For some clarification, I'm not a lawyer, don't work at the EFF, that sort of thing. We're not a studio. If you'd like to talk to Jake, he works at a really great studio called kink.com. Pretty exciting stuff there. And again, not technically a porno guy, more of a tech guy that just happens to work for a porn company. Didn't hear that. Okay, no problem. Let me get rid of my wings here. I can't tell if that's nitrous or so I think when we think of porn historically, the idea is that porn is this big innovator on the internet, and that's where the internet's powered from, or these are the guys that pay the bills reliably, or maybe they're the innovators are pushing the new technology, maybe the reason we have HD, DVD versus Blu-ray, or maybe the reason we have terabyte hard drives, that sort of thing. And I think in the beginning that truly was the situation. Clearly with VHS versus Betamax, there was some influence there. Some of the early webcast streaming stuff, if you remember things like See You See Me, the early real video stuff, clearly that was used for this sort of enterprise. And online credit card processing was clearly used by adult prior to things like eBay and PayPal and those sorts of systems. Something that's fairly common is that organizations that pursue this really generally lack clue, not only on the technical side, but on the business side. Essentially, it's people that aren't really professional. It's not, your typical company with an MBA or venture capital funded or that sort of thing. So it's kind of a mishmash. It's usually kind of a mom and pop operation that doesn't necessarily have kind of classic business knowledge, like someone to keep track of the books and the record keeping and make sure the business is legitimate to be audited. And particular to tonight's conversation is talking a little bit about the Web 2.0 space. And when we think about Web 2.0, we think about APIs, XHTML, compliant pages, karma, or some sort of moderation rating, that sort of scheme. And I'm going to try to tap into some of those features and see if they're valid to apply to what I call Porn 2.0, kind of the next generation of porn. Can we make porn a better experience, which clearly Web 2.0 is trying to do with the read-write community. When you look at the industry, one of the things that's extremely frustrating is that there are no real third parties like Nielsen ratings or Hitwise or even things like Alexa really don't give us a good way to view the industry even on a technical level. Even more frustrating is there's no kind of like ING or large industrial firm that would monitor how big the industry is growing and report it to stock investors, that sort of thing. So lots of numbers have been thrown around. Some of the largest I've seen is 2.6 billion just on the online space. And that I can't actually find how they came up with that number. They're just totally kind of extrapolating out of the air based upon DVD sales and credit card processing. It's a little unclear how they got that number. So instead, I have a few numbers that are a little bit more accurate because these were published and I was able to find a URL and some sort of source for them. An example would be a group called DTI Services. This is run by basically a multi-millionaire Japanese businessman, and he has about 30 different sites. One site is an $80 million site. This is a cam site where it's essentially one-on-one interaction. So there are kind of contractors that have a webcam at home, and then there are customers that contract to get time with that person over the service, and that's dxlive.com. This was actually mentioned in New York Times recently. Mentioned Jake's company, kink.com is a very well-respected BDSM company in San Francisco. It's been around for quite a while, and there was an article about their last publicly known figures, which was at 16 million in 2005. Kink is definitely growing. They just bought their own building in San Francisco, a very large historical building called the Armory. You can look that up at sfarmory.com. So they're obviously growing if they're buying property in San Francisco. Another great example is Friend Finder. They're not clearly a 100% adult company. They're known for doing personals, everything from Christian personals to bondage.com, so kind of the whole gamut. Pretty interesting organization. They are fairly large. They've got about 300 employees, and it's about 200 million. That's unconfirmed, though. Like most adult companies, are typically privately held. The only ones that are publicly known are the large brands that you'd be aware of, like, say Playboy and Hustler and that sort of thing. And really, they're kind of a brand company like Coca-Cola. They're not actually manufacturing the product; they're selling their brand. It's really kind of a licensing issue. A little bit more continuing about the industry. Frat boys or fraternity boys is kind of a frowned upon situation, but really this is somewhat true. I've been to the adult conferences, and it's really not a technical crowd, and it's not a business crowd. It really is a mom and pop sort of situation where they just happen to kind of fall into this particular business and said, hey, I'm making money, let's keep going with this, and generally they're somewhat successful. In many ways, they operate very similar to kind of the black hat or the red hat community, but with a business twist. There are conferences literally every 3 to 2 weeks with an international focus, primarily within the US, but there are a number of events held in Europe, Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, that sort of thing. And what's different about these particular conferences is why they would have a track and there may be some workshops. Really, this is a B2B sort of play. So multi-million-dollar deals are essentially made in hotel rooms over, a keg or, some sort of, drinking, that sort of thing. Studios are starting to realize that DVD sales are declining. This is not only happening in mainstream, but is definitely starting to affect the adult space. They really don't have kind of a long tail approach to how they're going to continue to get revenue from their content. And they're kind of scared about the internet because they're afraid of piracy, or they don't want to have their brand diminished, and so it's pretty tricky out there. And DRM, I think, is really the best examples of studios really being scared. Essentially, our personal stance on DRM is that we're not necessarily against it or think it's evil or bad or it's a good thing. The reality of DRM is that it's a tech support problem. That's the biggest problem, is that when you have DRM, you have customers who have to deal with licensing keys and particular players, and how do you get the content onto different devices. And so our view is that it should be agnostic. Unless there's an open source standard for DRM, we're not going to go down the DRM route, because it's not going to make us money, because we're going to get a bunch of tech support calls. And in this industry, when the customer's unhappy, they're really unhappy. Now, there's definitely a lighter side of the industry. Like any business, we have birthdays that we celebrate in the office, and we like to have some kind of comedic view of birthdays that we have in the office. Now, I don't want you to think that we're, sexist, or that we're. I want to be clear. that we're not sexist, and we are politically correct. We have a little bit of everything at the office, so whatever works for you, we've got it there. A little bit more about the industry, continuing on. Search engines are a really interesting part of the pie here as in the ecosystem. The two larger search engines, the one that's kind of falling behind number 2, the Y one, is actually really hip to adults. They really like ads, and we pay, and we're good customers, and that sort of thing. The problem they have is that the organizations are so large, they're concerned about legal issues and their stock reports and their SEC filings and that sort of thing. So the real big problem with search engines is not putting ads on them. It's their blacklist and whitelist of search terms essentially changed on a weekly basis. So if you want to put an adult ad, say Google or Yahoo, generally you have to go through a broker or a third party that has a much stronger relationship with the search engine. So that's a little bit frustrating, but gives you some kind of insight into how we work with much larger organizations. 2257 is a statute in the U.S. I think it's Title 18, Section 18. It's kind of a mixed blessing. Essentially, what 2257 states is that content that was made prior to November 1st, 1990 is now kind of highly prized, because any content that's made after that date has to have quite a bit of documentation, 2 or 3 forms of federally or state-issued documentation. So this would be like a passport or a driver's license, that sort of thing. The problem with 2257 is that the powers that be would like to extend that to make it kind of 2257++, so that not only would the studio have to record this personal information of the stars, or what's known as the talent in the movie, but they'd also have to supply that information to what's called secondary producers. And we're what's called a secondary producer. We're essentially kind of a content distribution network. So we would get that information, all the talents, birth date, home address, telephone number, that sort of thing. We're very much against that, and don't want to infringe on the privacy of stars and folks that work in this community. So it's kind of a mixed blessing. On the flip side, content that was made prior to November 1st, 1990 is now actually highly prized because it's excluded from the statute. So that content is actually a little bit worth more than modern day content, because it doesn't require such formal documentation. And in many cases, the talent or the stars of these movies are trying to buy the content back from the original studio. When we look at the ISP space, we have our own network, and we set up a contract with a large tier 1 that's both a tier 1 internationally, not just in the US. And their concern was anything that had the word teen in the title was something that was a little bit risky for them. And so we asked for clarification on their AUP and on their contract, what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. And so they were kind of very vague in their AUP. And so what ended up happening is we had a conference call and we went through every single title that had teen listed. It was a little bit frustrating, but that's what we had to do to get the contract signed. In their case, we would be automatically excluded if we had any content that was bestiality based, potentially any hentai, and potentially any anime. By the way, we don't have any of that sort of content. And what's happening is a lot of the hardcore, the risque content is moving offshores, typically to Europe, whether it be in the Netherlands or maybe in Germany, that sort of thing. It's becoming very popular. And if you'd like to kind of stalk people in this space, you would think that XPeeps or PornoTube or stuff you kind of see on Dig would be the place to be. It's actually adultwhoswho.com. It's kind of like the MySpace of this industry. So you see like talent there and affiliate managers and these mom and pop operations, the founders, that sort of thing. Again, finally, a little bit more about the industry, because it's very complicated how it all works. There's a fairly large ecosystem. So there are things called TGPs, the gallery pages, pretty creative name there. These are essentially sites that are a bunch of free samples with then affiliate links back to a particular membership site, so they get a kickback. And it may be they get a one-time sign-up, they may get a recurrence of the monthly charge, they may get a bounty, there may be a coupon, there may be a cross-sell. There's a bunch of different ways to play this. Membership sites are what we classically think of as porn sites. Affiliate networks are large networks where you essentially sign up for one account that gives you access to a large variety of sites, even though each site may only have a dozen pictures, you have access to 100 of these sites. Traffic brokers, as I mentioned, this is typically with dealing with search engines and other industries like, say, the mobile space. Member area ads are really interesting. The most valuable ads in this industry are actually member area ads. And what this means is that it's a customer that's already on an adult site, or it's already a porn site, they've already logged in, and this is a win-win because, one, they like adult content, and two, they already have a working credit card. Revenue share, this gets really tricky, and I'm not an MBA, so I won't attempt to explain that. Cross-sells, exit coupons, all sorts of things. It gets pretty incestuous. Visually, I think it's really good to see some examples of this. So membership sites, typically we think of things in a couple different varieties. So niche content would be something like Suicide Girls or kink.com. Networks, Top Bucks, Pride Bucks, Silvercast, Pussycast, there's a bunch of different affiliate networks. Video on demand sites, so this would be kind of the online version of the experience you'd have like in a hotel room where you can pick and choose what you want to watch. So these are where you'd be paying essentially per a minute. Really interesting, kind of in the middle here, is the review sites or the TGP sites. These are kind of this weird kind of anomaly that's happened in the industry. Back in the day we had sites like Persian Kitty and things that would list kind of password sites. Well, these have kind of morphed into kind of a Tom's Hardware guide of porn. And so what they actually do is review porn sites and give it a rating based upon, do they have DRM, how fast are their servers, do they have a variety of content, how fast is their customer support, respond to emails, that sort of thing. The traffic brokers I talked about, Wildline and Traffic Dude, are fairly large in the industry. There's a lot of different press. Certainly you've heard of AVN, the large conference in Las Vegas, ASCAP, XBiz, Free Speech Coalition, Why Not as a forum. A lot of different organizations here, particularly in the event space. Like I said, literally events happen every 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not making that up. Also, billing is very important. In the U.S., the largest billers are Paycom or Epic and CC Bill. Is this about the right speed? Faster? Slower? Anyone out there? Okay, I don't know if anyone's actually out there, so let me throw some swag. Let's try that again. Okay, now you're waking up. So my day job, VideoBox. So the business has been around 4 years. It's fairly small. We've got about 30 employees. Out of everyone that works for the company, there's only 3 that have actually worked in adult prior to this job. So it's full of MBAs and dot-commers and enterprise folks. So it's truly a technical company. On the technology side, it's a Java backend that powers the site. And we've got a little bit of mix of C and Perl and PHP, all kinds of goodies, of course. AS36472, so fairly new when it comes to the multi-homing space. And why do we think our model is unique or different? And this is not a sales pitch, but essentially this is how we think we're slightly different than ye old porn site, and why it's interesting to geeks, besides the fact that it's not DRM and we don't do bandwidth limiting and that sort of stuff. Essentially we're not evil in the porn space. But one of our big claim to fame is adding 5 DVDs a day. And so when we look at these different sites here that exist for the membership sites, VOD sites are really popular. The problem with VOD sites is they've got about anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 DVDs. That's a lot of content to go through. And so we kind of looked at that and said, well, we don't want to be a Suicide Girls or a kink.com because you're building a brand, and establishing a brand takes a long time. And the network is kind of, there's not really anything exciting there. So how can we get something kind of in the middle where it can be a flat rate, but you're still getting some new value or access to new content? And so what we do is we add 5 DVDs a day on our straight site or our main site, and then 1 on our gay site. So there's always fresh content to pick from. Besides all the marketing crap, I think what's really interesting is that we really pride ourselves on the technical side, and you'll see that in the slides coming forward. We care about metadata, we care about the quality of the video, we care about how fast the video downloads, we care about the codecs that we make available. We are essentially geeks that just happen to be working in porn. So as I said, what we do is license content directly from studios or distributors. This gets a little bit tricky. Content gets recycled quite a bit, so it's very frustrating. You buy content from Studio X, and then Studio Y gives you half of the exact same content you just bought, but the DVD box cover is different. Sometimes actually customers will point this out to us because we didn't catch it internally. Very frustrating when that happens. Definitely some competitors in our space, Video Z, DVD Box, taking directly from our name. The VOD sites are also kind of indirect competitors. Hot Movies and ABN are approximately about $200 to $250 million a year companies, fairly large organizations, very well established. In the context of this space, small on the network side is basically less than about 10 gigabits a second and peak capacity that's being utilized. So some of the names you might be familiar with are GFY. This is a popular forum that means go fuck yourself. And Sex Tracker is also fairly popular. These are run by hosting companies. There's a few other hosting companies that actually specialize, particularly in the adult space. CWIE or Cave Creek is a good example of that. What's interesting to note is that these guys have been doing anywhere from about 5 to 50 gigabits for years. This was prior to the phenomena of YouTube and that sort of thing. And to this day, they're starting to catch up pretty quick to the mainstream. It's really interesting how fast they're growing. So here's a screenshot of what the site looks like. This seems very marketing-like, so I'll make it under like 5 seconds here. Here's the cover, here's the metadata you can click on, here's a sample clip, here's some recommended junk. The thing that we're known for is what's called internally the film strip, but for this crowd we'll call it the pick and wank. Now the way this works is that we provide a thumbnail view. This is about every 10 seconds, and you can basically drag an image over and say, okay, I want to start the movie here, and I want to end the movie here, and then click. So now what you're going to appreciate, now what you're really going to appreciate, the true AV geeks in the house are really going to appreciate about this is this is not like real video SMIL where you're downloading the entire file and you're seeking ahead. We actually dynamically generate the table of contents, the header of the file. So you're only really downloading the bits that you're interested in. So really nice stuff there. This is a standard Windows Media 8 file, so it works fine in VLC, MPlayer, all that sort of good stuff. By the way, there's no actual Windows machines utilized in the production environment. It's just the codec that was selected about 4 years ago, prior to my involvement in the company. So what are the features that we have today that make us kind of different or unique? Lucene-powered search. This is a pretty standard open source search engine that most folks use. So you can do Boolean style searches. I'm looking for this particular star, this series, this category. Click, 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 and then you get the results. Pretty nice thing there. So metadata that's actually useful. User comments per each DVD. This is pretty exciting. We're kind of experimenting and putting our toes in the water with Web 2.0 space. Not allowing people to create profiles and karma ratings and that sort of thing, but allowing users to give a 1 out of 5 rating and to also leave comments for each chapter of a DVD. We also have a recommendation engine. The best analogy here is something like Amazon.com. So you've been watching these seconds. Other people that watch these seconds also like those seconds. You might want to check them out. Works really well. To be Privacy 2.0 compliant, we also allow an opt-out feature for this. So if you don't want us to remember what you're watching, we won't do that for you. But if you do, you can log back in and say, oh yeah, that was that DVD I was watching out of the library that we have. What are some of the features that we're adding in the future to kind of bring us up to what I'd say essentially kind of the porn 2.0 space? H.264 is pretty much drop dead obvious. That's where we have to go. We recently launched a Flash player. Fairly happy with that. The Flash player allows the same interface where you're presented with a film strip and you can seek ahead and start in a particular area. Right now, its basic functionality is a looping function. So essentially pretend it's like a video editor. You scroll ahead, you find something you're interested in, select it, just keep playing it over and over again. To make that, again, Web 2.0 compliant, we need to add tagging and mashup support. And again, that's something new to this industry, so getting licensing deals with studios has been very difficult. They have no idea what a mashup is. Pretty difficult stuff. Internationalization, so pretty obvious here: Spanish, German, French, Japanese, Chinese. We will only be translating the actual navigation of the site and the metadata, not actually the user comments that each user posts, and some other neat stuff that I really can't share right now. Now you may be asking, well, where's kind of the tech, the exciting part about this, the boring marketing crap he's talking about? Well, how do we get all this content there? So our straight site has about 3,500 DVDs. Like I said, we had 5 DVDs a day. So originally what we were doing is essentially we had some Dell desktop PCs and we're just popping the DVDs in and clicking buttons, and not very efficient. The next step of that was, well, we'll just outsource that. We'll find some people, and you know, they've got a bunch of machines at home, and they can just rip these things through and bring back a big USB hard drive to the office, and then that worked pretty well too. But when we wanted to add flash, we're like, well, if we use that procedure, it will take a half a year to encode this. So we have to industrialize this or automate this procedure. And so the outcome of that is pretty exciting. What we have here is a DVD jukebox. And so what these are geared for is like universities or libraries. And so typically they're geared for slightly more mainstream content, say like National Geographics or encyclopedias, that sort of thing. We're using it for porn instead. Now what's nice about this, again for the geek crowd, is that this is a SCSI device, so it's basically a tape changer. So the actual robot is just an additional SCSI ID on the bus. So you just grab a DVD, pop it in the drive, rip it, and grab another one and keep going through. You can bulk load approximately about 400 DVDs. In the configuration that we have, we put 200 DVDs in there. And then we just bought a bunch of cheap desktops. So these are about $800 machines. A couple machines that kind of keep a cache of the VOB files that we're ripping. And the process is pretty well automated. So we rip the VOBs, we encode them using mencoder and FFmpeg and all that good stuff. Add the metadata, and then we rsync it to the colo. We're trying to automate this process and make it as geeky as we can, and it's really frustrating. The metadata that the studios provide is usually completely useless. The name gets cut off, even though you got Twidlet, the midget is squirting. You don't know what number it is or what series it is. In this case, you don't know the title and the provider ID were swapped, and generally the case we get is the data is null. In most cases, studios are actually burning the DVDs themselves. They have a third party burning it. So again, we can't trust the metadata that they provide, so we have to do it ourselves. On the storage side, this is kind of interesting. You know, being kind of tech guys and porn guys, we have the mashup of trying to be kind of cool and be cheap and find somewhere in the middle. And so we decided not to hand all our money to NetApp or EMC and that sort of thing. Kind of found a kind of a middle ground solution that's not just yield SATA drives and a big box, and something a little bit better than that. This is a really interesting product. This is called the SATA Beast, and what's really amusing about it is in 4U, you get 35 terabytes usable. And this is RAID 5 with some global spares in it. And a lot of people ask me, oh, well, that must be the hottest thing, and it must be really inefficient. This is actually the coldest thing that we have in our colo. It's a really efficient design. We've got about 6 of these. I wanted to bring one out here, but it was just way too much. So some geek porn here. We have just a bunch of Dell servers. Don't want to go too much detail in the architecture. They may think that that's too proprietary, but essentially you have kind of a caching level, so a bunch of squid servers essentially. We have well over 50 servers that's all they do is cache. You also want to note one thing here. The LEDs that indicate if the drive is powered or it's being accessed are solid. They're always solid, all the time. They never blink. The other thing to note for the network geeks is that this is a standard 6509, but those are 10 gigabit links, and there's 2 there, and that's actually an old picture. There's now 4. Geek porn, you know. Oh, let's move a little bit fast here. Let's see here. So you're asking, well, why is he showing a network diagram? Well, this is pretty obvious if you look at route tables and looking glasses and that sort of thing. You can kind of figure out how our network is combined. What's interesting to note is for our network, we only have 3 or 4 websites. We're not a hosting company. Like I said in the beginning about the business side, it's our own brand, our own business, our own technology. So for this particular AS, there's only 3 websites behind it. And I wanted to show how we have kind of a mix of both kind of classic US tier 1s and also some networks that are pretty prevalent in the European area, and why we have that mix. One One of the things that's very frustrating is the customer experience that a user is having. For this particular content, they want it to download fast and snappy, and more so they want the quality to be good and the metadata to be accurate. So this is not like YouTube, it's much more challenging for that. So I wanted to find out, well, how do we monitor the speed that people are getting? Do we have them download some special applet, or do we just have them do a speed test, or do we just do some sort of reporting, that sort of thing? How do we get this data? Well, typically what network engineers will do is some sort of kind of analysis, either in the form of NetFlow or SFlow. As our network as a Cisco shop, NetFlow was really our only option, and so we weren't able to use SFlow, and there's some really nice tools out there for SFlow. So we kind of figured out, well, how can we get some sort of alternative where we can measure the customer experience that we're getting? Most of these open source tools for both of these network analysis protocols are really geared for, well, how's my peering doing versus my transit, or is my traffic going to Europe, or is it going to the US, that sort of thing. And it's not very granular at the level that we wanted to get it at. So our solution is basically taking all the access logs from those 40 or 50 servers that you saw and piping them to a bunch of log servers. This is with syslog-ng, multicast. Then we pump it into a database. Prior to going into the database, we had some additional data like GeoIP, how fast they download the data, that's an Apache module, and their ASN information, like what was their origin ASN and the next hop ASN, like what ISP did we use to serve them. We then use this data along with customer support emails that say, hey, I'm only getting 10 kilobits and I've got a cable modem, or I've got DSL, that sort of thing, and group it together. And about every 2 weeks we have a meeting and we look, okay, what can we do to adjust our network to get better experience for the end user? And so by gathering all this data, we can adjust our router configuration and essentially send local pref and say, well, even though ISP X, the AS path is shorter, they may have some peering or some saturation or some politics in the way. We use ISP B, they may be 3 additional AS paths longer, but the route seems to be better. That's what our customers are experiencing. Our internal goal is to have at least 200 kilobits or faster for customers. This is extremely difficult domestically in the US. Essentially, we're going back to Ma Bell, where there's one large phone company and one large cable company. The cable company in particular doesn't have a single ASN. They've got about 40 ASNs. They're building this thing called a backbone in 2007. So they're really playing catch up to building a large network, and so it's very difficult. A lot of the ISPs in the US only have access to half their network, and so we're trying to find a way, well, the other half of the network, how do we improve speeds for the customers? And so we use this data to, again, adjust the configuration on our router. It's very tricky also to detect things like download managers. A lot of people download a download manager and immediately set it to 300 simultaneous connections at 10 kilobyte chunks, and that's just really not efficient when you're downloading video. Again, throwing kind of random geek bits, we process approximately about 90 to about 100 video requests a second. The other thing to note is about 90% of our users actually download the video. So we, in the industry, would have what's called archivers. These are essentially people that don't get off on the porn, but they get off on filling up their hard drives. We don't have typical streamers, a little bit different than the YouTube model. Speed test. So here's some of the data that we can get out of it. So since we record all the downloads, we can see, well, the UK on average is getting 405 kilobits, and the Netherlands is getting 243. I think that number is probably inverted, but we can do these little nice, pretty RD tool graphs and ask some pretty interesting questions that we can get out that are useful for both business case questions and technical questions. So, are we having some I/O bottleneck on a particular server that's being slowed in a particular region? Or is there some sort of content that's more popular in Europe that we need to maybe put the content in Europe, that sort of thing. So it really answers a lot of neat questions that we have. Here's an example of the top 10 downloads between Germany, Netherlands, and America. Now, the reason that I talked about the marketing in the beginning, saying that we had 5 DVDs a day, is to note that there's only, one DVD in common that everyone liked. And this is sorted in order of popularity. So clearly there are different tastes between the 3 markets represented here. And this was only for a day, but that's pretty much the trend that we see. There's usually only one DVD that's popular worldwide. On the security side, obviously there's some security folks at this conference. Generally the problem with adult sites is the typical ones. Cross-site scripting, people with HD passwords that are, bad permissions, world readable, that sort of thing. Biggest problem that we have is that the third parties that we integrate with are not like a VeriSign or a Thought. They're essentially a company like CCC or Paycom that's not used to dealing with things like APIs. One of these companies actually connects to a raw SQL port. They expect you to have a MySQL server just out on the net that they can connect to directly. And that's their form of integrating with you. Pretty scary stuff. As I mentioned, the download managers are a real big problem. We don't mind if you have a 1 gigabit connection or a modem, as long as you only open up a few connections at a time that are established. And most folks don't get that just pumping up the download manager doesn't make things faster. So we've had to develop a lot of custom Apache modules and some pretty fancy load balancer rules to deal with that problem. The other thing is source IPs. This is something that we hold close to heart. You know, we appreciate technologies like Tor and proxies and the benefits that they can have for folks. The tricky part is, well, how do we make sure that if there's not fraud that's being issued in these situations? And so it gets a little bit tricky. We have other ways of kind of limiting that sort of thing. The other problem is that users that generally watch this content are not the most clueful folks. They usually have a lot of malware on their machine. And this is very frustrating, where they may be able to download videos, but they can't navigate our site because the URL is different and they've got some sort of virus or malware. Really frustrating there. I think this is some of the funny parts of the presentation is kind of the email that I get pretty much every single day. In this case, our co-location company that we write a check to for about $20,000 every month was asking for about a half a dozen free accounts. Our average price is $10 a month, so they're being a little bit cheap. This is a subversion commit message. Since we add 5 DVDs a day and we're essentially kind of the Walmart of porn, we want to have kind of a variety of content out there. In this case, customers were complaining that we had too much transsexual content, so we adjusted the percentage of how much content was being available to them. This is one of my favorites here. This is a husband and her wife that really likes the site, and she's also my Dell account rep. These are kind of the meat and potatoes here. This is the best of the unsubscribes here. Pretty good ones here. Busted because my wife was masturbating to the site. I have a girlfriend that jerked me off now. I'm mothers against pornos. My life is now with Christ. Hold your applause. It gets much, much better. Your service is great, but I broke up with my boyfriend. I don't really want to pay for his porn anymore. I'm getting married, but hopefully my wife will take care of me. Yes. These are all legitimate, by the way. I didn't make this up. I have to cancel as I've been masturbating daily watching these movies. My cock is sore now, and the day I feel horny too often in the office, I have to go to the toilet to jack off when I see a colleague with big butts like those in Video Box. I'm simply masturbating and too horny too often. Just too much. Because I jacked my meat so hard it left blisters on me, so my mom made me cancel the account because of the hospital bill. She also found out that my nut rags, after she found out that I was a member, she searched my room and also found my dildo with the crap stains all over it, and she was mad at the stains of the floor and the smell. She then searched everything in the house and found my goatee collection buried under the deck, and I'm very sorry to cancel, and trust me, my balls have never been bluer than they are now. I gotta go. I hear Mom coming. It's my favorite. I might be going to jail. That's a good one. So, one thing I want to show here, if this is going to work, let's see if this works. Sorry here. So one of the things that I mentioned was the downloads that we keep track of. And what we have here, assuming this is going to work, is a quasi real-time display of DVD downloads that are occurring on the site. The network's been a little bit flaky here, so it may not work. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So the real nice thing about this is there's a couple interesting features here. You can obviously click and then see the name of the title. This is Super Squirt number 2. Everything that gets kind of interesting is rolling it over and seeing, okay, well, what is Europe downloading? One of the things I didn't mention is that we actually have 2 peaks in our download. So we have a US peak that's mostly East Coast focused time. The European peak is actually in the morning. So it appears that Europeans like their porn in the morning where Americans like it in the evening. So we don't see too many there. This is also about 2% of our downloads right now. If I listed everything, it would cover the whole screen. But what's interesting here is that we'll sometimes see content in places like Dubai and Egypt and China and areas where we clearly should be blocked, but maybe someone at the right space is able to get access. For those of you that are familiar with the US, one of the things that's kind of interesting is looking at the different demographics that exist within the US. In the Midwest, essentially the Bible Belt, the more kind of conservative area in the US, is where some of our particular content is a lot more popular. So you can put layers on this, and hopefully this can... So one of the things that we've noticed with this, because our billing is outsourced and we don't generally know where the customer... Oh, this thing's going crazy. Generally, we don't know where the customer exactly lives. This is just geo-IP data. One of the things that we notice is down kind of in the Bible Belt, or essentially the Midwest, where it's mostly conservative, this actually happens to be our most popular area for gay content, which is really interesting for some reason. I don't know. I don't know. So that's all I have. Any questions? And I have some other promotional items that I won't throw out, but as I mentioned, we do have a gay site, and so we have some jock straps here. Being kind of a dumb, naive American that's straight, I kind of said, oh, this is kind of interesting. Why isn't the logo on the front? Oh, it's in the back. Interesting. Okay, so if anyone's interested in these, this come up. I don't want to throw them out or anything like that. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. The YouTube guy presented at Nanog last year stating that they were at 20 gigs per second back then. Now you said 200. So how's your growth when it comes to traffic?
Don't really want to comment. I essentially provided that by saying how many number of 10 gigabit interfaces that we have. That's all I can say. So. It doesn't double as fast as kind of the flash mob sites. We see growth consistently every month. The growth continues to go up, but it doesn't double every month. Any other questions?
Yes. How? I'm wondering, and this is a legit question, are you hiring? Please, pretty please.
I wish. It's a pretty small operation. One of the larger part of the organization is something called content operations. Now the reason that I showed the screenshot, clearly I'm a technical guy, not a marketing guy, but if you remember from the screenshot, not the film stripper interface, but just kind of the navigating a particular DVD, you see 6 thumbnails, essentially kind of the money shots or the best shots of a chapter. Someone picks those out by hand. So content operations is a group that we're always looking for, because essentially you're looking at hundreds of DVDs every single day. The other problem is that they also do QA. So with QA, they actually listen and watch the movie the first 4 or 5 seconds to make sure the audio syncs up, and then scroll to the back and make sure the audio is okay in the back at the end of the movie. Sounds like a lot of fun, but most people only last about 2.5 weeks, and they're like, oh my god, after that. So, any other questions?
Yeah, one question. You have hard facts or some estimates on how much internet traffic is actual porn? Like 80%, 70%, or less?
I wish. That'd be great. No, that's clearly not the case. One of the things I mentioned in the beginning is it's really frustrating that there's really no third parties to validate how big the industry is, both on a technical scale or on a business side. And I don't personally think it's that much. But I do think some of the larger organizations like ISPs and content distribution networks and storage providers are typically their best customers or adult customers. They're not waiting for VC money or to cash out, that sort of thing. So I think we're a pretty decent percentage of the internet, but not as much as we used to be back in the day. There's still things like Usenet and things like that are popular, but Web 2.0, YouTube is a lot more popular. You don't have to pay. It's free, and You don't care about the quality or how fast it downloads, that sort of thing. So I don't think it's nearly that big. It'd be great though if it was.
I have a technical question regarding the Apache modules you coded yourself. Did you release them on the GPL? So is the source code available? For example, for logging the download speed and the access log and these things.
Sure. So there's two modules that we use. There's three. One Apache module is called mod video box, and that's what chops up the video files so that you can only download what you're interested in. So we haven't released that. The modules that we use within the bandwidth database is modlog.io and modlog first byte. Modlog first byte you can get from Google, and modlog.io is built into Apache too. So they're already out there. And again, what we take from Apache is just take the syslog to a central box. So really all the magic secret sauce is once the data is out of Apache on a log host. And we haven't released that because it's just some really nasty PHP code.
If porn is your day job, what do you do in the evenings?
That's a good one, things like this. For amusement. I'm a geek like anyone else. So. This is actually the first vacation I've had in about 2 years since working for this company, so it's been a pretty long haul. So I try to get outside of the office is my goal. Anyone else? Oh, in the back?
Matt, if any of these people are thirsty, where could they go for free beer after the talk?
Yes. Camp Anaconda, right across from bar, free booze. If you get me drunk enough, maybe some free porn. Any other questions? Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it.